The knife hit the post a hair's breadth from Garrick Voss's thumb, and the whole square went silent enough to hear the river running under the crossing planks. "Cheat," Luke Fletcher said, loud enough for the whole fair to hear, though his voice cracked a little on the word because his heart was slamming against his ribs. That riddle sheet was marked before old Elder Ossen ever opened his mouth. I saw the wax seal broken twice. Voss straightened from where he'd flinched away from the blade, his fine wool coat pulled tight over a gut that had never known a hard winter, and smiled the way a man smiles when he still believes he holds every card in the deck. "You accuse me of cheating a clan-blessed wager fiddler, in front of the chief himself." "I accuse you of cheating," Luke said, "because you did." The crowd around the fair square at Weir's Crossing pressed closer, farmers and mill hands and traders who had come down from the hills and up from the river towns to watch the treaty renewal the way they might watch a hanging or a horse race, hungry for something to talk about all winter. At the center of the square, atop a wide stump ringed with torches even in the gray afternoon light, stood the reason for all of it. Yatul Frostwolf stood with her arms crossed and her jaw set like she was carved from the same stone as the watchtowers up in the hills, and Luke Fletcher, for all that his pulse was still hammering from the knife throw, could not stop himself from looking at her. She wore fitted travel leathers the deep brown red of old cedar bark, laced snug up the sides from hip to ribs, a wide belt cinched at her waist that showed just how strong and shaped she was beneath all that hide and stitching, vambraces of the same leather banded with iron studs at her forearms, and her black hair pulled back in a single thick braid threaded through with a silver clasp shaped like a wolf's skull, the mark of her clan, the mark of her father's blood. Her skin was a deep mossy green, her tusks small and neat where they showed at the corners of her mouth, and her eyes were the pale gold of a winter sun, fixed right now on Luke with an expression that was somewhere between fury and disbelief. She did not look like a woman who wanted to be won. She looked like a woman who could break the stump she stood on with one stamp of her boot, and everyone in the square knew it, and that was exactly the point of the wager, that the man who won her would have to be worth something, because a woman like Yatul Frostwolf did not need saving, and everyone in that square, human and orc alike, knew that too. "The wager stands," said Elder Ossen, an old bent man from the clan side of the crossing, holding up the carved ashwood token that had passed hand to hand through 3 trials that afternoon. His voice shook, but not from age. Strength went to the toll lord. Skill went to the toll lord second, until this man's knife proved truer. Wit went to this man clean and the tie-breaking throw as well. By the old bargain, the wager is won by Luke Fletcher, storyteller of the road. Voss's face went the color of curdled milk. "This is absurd," he snapped. "The man has no land, no trade worth the name, no coin to speak of. He plucks a fiddle in taverns for copper and tells lies for his supper. You would bind the daughter of Chief Rurgesh Frostwolf to a beggar with a broken boot heel." "The wager did not ask what a man has," said Chief Rurgesh himself, a mountain of an orc in furs and iron who had watched the whole contest without once smiling, his gold eyes, the same pale gold as his daughter's, moving from Voss to Luke and back again. "It asked what a man is. You wish to buy my daughter with fixed dice and a bought elder toll lord. This one threw a blade at your fat hand rather than let you cheat, knowing full well I might have taken his throwing arm off at the shoulder for the insolence. That tells me more than your coin ever could." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, quickly swallowed when Voss's men shifted their hands toward their sword hilts. Luke felt his stomach drop through the planking of the square. He had entered this fool contest on a dare from Tobin the ferryman, 3 tankards deep in the belief that watching Garrick Voss lose something for once would be worth any embarrassment. He had not, in any part of his mind, believed he would win. He had certainly never believed the prize would be a living, breathing, furiously beautiful orc woman who was, at this very moment, looking at him like she wanted to throw him into the river and let the current sort out whether he could swim. "I did not agree to this," Yatul said, and her voice cut through the square clean and low, an accent to it that rolled the words like river stones. "I am not a token to be tossed on a bet between drunk men." "No," Chief Rurgesh said, not unkindly, but with the weight of a man who had made this choice 100 times over a long, hard life of holding peace together with both fists. "You are the seal on a treaty that keeps our people from bleeding into that river again, daughter. I would not ask it of you if I saw another way, but you are Frostwolf. You know the cost of no wager at all." Yatul's gaze did not leave Luke's face. He made himself hold it, though every instinct in him wanted to look away, to apologize, to explain that he had never meant to win anything from her, least of all her. "Until the first snow," she said finally, loud enough that the whole square heard it, loud enough that it was less a request than a declaration carved into the day itself. "That is the old custom too, is it not, elder? A season to judge the man. I will give this fiddler until the first snow falls on the valley. If I find nothing in him worth staying for, I return to my clan, treaty or no treaty, and no man here will stop me." Her eyes flicked, just once, toward Voss, sharp as a drawn blade. "Least of all you." Voss's mouth worked like he wanted to argue, but Chief Rurgash's stare settled on him like a boulder settling into a riverbed, and he said nothing more. "Until the first snow, then," the chief said. "So it is witnessed." Elder Asen pressed the ashwood token into Luke's hand. It was warm from all the palms that had carried it that day, smooth from years of use, carved with the shape of a running wolf on one face and a flame on the other. Luke closed his fingers around it because he did not know what else to do with his hands, and looked up to find Yatul already walking toward him, her stride unhurried, powerful, a woman who had never once in her life had to hurry for anyone. She stopped close enough that he had to tip his head back to hold her gaze, close enough that he caught the scent of leather and pine smoke and something like crushed juniper that clung to her skin. "You threw a knife at a fat toll lord's hand to prove a cheat," she said quietly, just for him. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "In my experience," Luke said, "those two things travel together more often than not." Something moved behind her eyes, not warmth, not yet, but the faintest crack of curiosity in all that fury. "We will see which one you are, fiddler," she said, "before the snow comes." And that, Luke Fletcher would think later, lying awake and listening to a stranger breathe in the next room of his own small cottage, was the moment his ordinary, threadbare, wandering life ended, and something far larger and far more dangerous than any wager began. The walk from Weir's Crossing to Luke's cottage took the better part of an hour, following the cart track that ran alongside the Ashwater River past the old grain mill and the ferryman's dock, and neither of them said much of anything for most of it. Luke carried his fiddle case slung over one shoulder and his good boots slung over the other because the left heel really had come loose, and Yatul walked a pace behind him with her hand never far from the long knife at her hip, watching the tree line the way a soldier watches ground she does not trust. "You do not have to walk behind me like I might bolt," Luke said eventually, when the silence had stretched past the point of comfort. "I am not fast enough to bolt anywhere. You'd catch me before I cleared the first fence." "I am not watching you," Yatul said. "I am watching the woods. There have been raider tracks on this side of the valley for 2 moons now, small bands. Nothing my father's scouts could not handle, until they started avoiding our scouts entirely, which is worse." "Raiders," Luke repeated, glancing sideways at her. "Here, we haven't had trouble since the old treaty was signed." "Which is exactly why it is worth noticing," she said, and something in the flat, practical way she said it told him this was not idle talk, that this was a woman who had spent her whole life reading danger into quiet places before the danger arrived to prove her right. They came around the bend where the mill wheel turned slow and heavy in the current, water sheeting off its paddles in the gray afternoon light, and Luke's cottage came into view small, stone-footed with a timber upper story, one crooked chimney, a garden gone half to weeds because he was gone more months of the year than he was home, and a woodpile that would not, he knew with a sinking feeling, last more than a few cold weeks. Yatul stopped at the fence line and looked at the place the way a general might look at a battlefield she had been ordered to hold. "This is your home," she said. It was not quite a question. "For now," he said. "I'm gone more than I'm here, truth told." Storyteller's life. Tavern to tavern, fair to fair, wherever there's a coin for a tale and a bed for the night that isn't the ground. He unlatched the gate, feeling suddenly, foolishly self-conscious of the sagging roofline, the overgrown garden bed, the general smallness of everything he had to offer a woman who had grown up in a chief's war camp with wolves for guard dogs. "It's not much. I won't pretend otherwise." "I did not expect much," Yatul said, and there was no cruelty in it, only a bone-plain honesty that Luke found, against all sense, more comfortable than kindness would have been. "I expected nothing at all, fiddler. A man who wins a woman on a dice game and a knife throw does not usually have a home worth walking to." She looked at him then, really looked, gold eyes narrowing slightly. "Why did you enter the trial at all? You did not know me. You did not want a wife. What did you want?" Luke considered lying. He decided against it. "Tobin the ferryman, you'll meet him, good man, terrible taste in ale, bet me I wouldn't have the stones to enter. I've got a weakness for a dare and an empty purse, and there was a prize on the strength trial I thought I might place in even if I didn't win outright." He shrugged, feeling the admission land somewhere unflattering. "I didn't think past that. I never imagined I'd win the whole thing, least of all win you. If I had, I like to think I'd have had the decency to walk away from the table." "Would you have?" Yatul asked, and there was something sharper in the question than simple curiosity. Luke thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about most things honestly, even when honesty cost him. "No," he admitted. "I don't think I would have. Not once I saw Voss's face when Asen read the token. Man like that needed losing to, and I wanted to be the one who did it." He met her eyes. "That's not the same as wanting you, I know. I'm not going to pretend it is. But I'll tell you plain, Orc Bride, whatever this season turns out to be, I don't intend to make you regret it more than you already do." Something flickered across her face, gone before he could name it. "We shall see, fiddler," she said again, and pushed past him through the gate into the yard, moving like she already owned the ground beneath her boots. The first weeks were an uneasy truce more than a courtship. Yatul took the upper room without asking and without apology, and Luke slept by the hearth on a pallet he told himself was perfectly comfortable, and knew was a lie every single night. She rose before dawn and ran the tree line at the edge of his land like she was keeping some private drill, came back with her leathers damp with sweat and her breathing even and easy, and regarded his attempts at cooking with the same flat, unimpressed patience she seemed to bring to everything. "This is burned," she told him the third morning, prodding at the porridge with the tip of her knife. "It's toasted," Luke said. "Adds flavor." "It adds smoke to the flavor," she said. But she ate it anyway, all of it, without complaint, and something about that small, stubborn generosity made Luke's chest ache in a way he did not have a name for yet. Weir's Crossing did not take kindly to her, not at first. The village sat where the Ashwater narrowed enough for Tobin's ferry to run a rope across, and where 3 mill roads met. A cluster of stone cottages and one long tavern with a sign shaped like a wheel, and the people there had grown up on stories of the old war, of orc warbands burning the grain stores 2 generations back, of grandfathers who never came home from the border fights. They did not look at Yatul and see a woman doing her best in a strange, uncertain arrangement. They saw a green-skinned reminder of every ghost story their mothers had frightened them with as children. The first time Luke brought her into the village proper, to the market stalls that ran along the riverbank on trading days, half the stalls went quiet, and the other half muttered loud enough to be heard. A woman selling turnips crossed herself with the old ward sign. A boy no older than 10 threw a clod of dirt that caught Yatul square on the shoulder before his mother could catch his wrist. Luke was moving before he decided to move, stepping between Yatul and the boy's furious, frightened mother. His hands raised, Not in surrender exactly, but in the universal gesture of a man trying to keep a small spark from becoming a fire. "He's a boy," Luke said evenly, to the gathering crowd more than to the mother. "Boys throw dirt. It's practically a law of nature. Nobody needs to make more of it than that." "You defend her over one of our own," someone called from the crowd, and Luke recognized the voice Hob Callan, the miller, a heavy-set man with flour permanently ground into the creases of his knuckles, who ran the grain mill upriver, and who Luke had always found pleasant enough in passing, if a little too quick to complain about tolls and taxes. "I'd defend a child from getting his ear boxed by his own mother for embarrassing her in the market," Luke said. "Same as I'd defend anyone's guest from getting stoned like a dog in the street. Yatul Frostwolf is a bride under clan law and the chief's own treaty, sealed before witnesses at the crossing fair not 3 weeks past. Any man here wants to argue with that treaty can take it up with Chief Rurgash himself, and I do not think any man here really wants to do that." The crowd's mutter did not vanish, but it thinned, uncertain, the way a fire thins when the wind changes. Yatul had not moved, had not flinched at the thrown dirt, had simply watched the whole exchange with an expression Luke could not read, gold eyes tracking him instead of the crowd. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly, once they were walking again, once the market noise had faded behind them. "I know," Luke said. "Most men would have let it pass, kept the peace by staying silent. Most men," Luke said, "haven't spent half their lives telling stories in taverns full of drunk strangers who just as soon throw a mug at your head as listen to your tale. You learn quick which silences are peace and which silences are just cowardice wearing peace's coat. That one back there was cowardice. I've got no patience left for it." Yatul was quiet for a long moment, her boots crunching on the frost-crisped grass beside the cart track. "In my clan," she said finally, "a warrior who stands between danger and someone weaker than themselves is given a mark of honor, a scar cut clean by their own chief's blade, worn with pride." She glanced sideways at him, something almost like amusement warming the gold of her eyes. "You would not survive the getting of it, fiddler. You flinch when I clean my knife too close to your boots." "I'll take the flinching," Luke said, "if it means keeping all my fingers." She laughed, actually laughed, a low, startled sound like she hadn't expected to make it, and something in Luke's chest turned over entirely at the sound of it. It was Garrick Voss who came calling 3 days later, riding up the cart track on a horse far too fine for a toll lord's salary, trailed by 2 of his hired men, and Luke felt the temperature of the whole afternoon drop before Voss even opened his mouth. "Fletcher," Voss said, not dismounting, looking down at Luke's crooked chimney and overgrown garden with an expression of theatrical pity. "I've come to offer you a kindness. A man in your position, no land worth the name, no coin, a wife he won by accident rather than merit, might find it a relief to be released from an arrangement that clearly does not suit either party." He looked past Luke to where Yatul stood in the cottage doorway, arms crossed, watching. "The clan chief would accept a fair settlement in coin to dissolve the wager. I am prepared to be generous." "You mean you're prepared to pay for what your fixed dice couldn't buy you honestly," Luke said. Voss's smile did not waver, but something behind it went colder. "Careful, fiddler. Accusations are a dangerous habit for a man with so little to lose and so much that could still be taken from him." "Is that a threat, toll lord?" "It is a fact of position," Voss said smoothly. "I control the crossing tolls. I control the mill leases. Half this valley's harvest passes through gates I hold the keys to. A man who makes an enemy of me does not usually enjoy a long, comfortable winter." His gaze flicked back to Yatul, lingering in a way that made Luke's hands curl into fists at his sides. "Whereas a woman of your bearing, Yatul Frostwolf, deserves better than a beggar's hearth and a fiddler's empty promises. My house has stone walls and full granaries. Consider the offer open." "I have considered it," Yatul said, stepping down off the threshold into the yard, and though she had not raised her voice at all, both of Voss's hired men shifted uneasily on their horses. I considered it the moment you tried to cheat your way to owning me at the fair, told Lord. My answer has not changed since, and it will not change for stone walls or full granaries. I am Frostwolf. I do not sell twice to a man I have already refused once. Voss's jaw tightened, the pleasant mask slipping for just a heartbeat to show something uglier underneath. The season is not over, he said. The first snow has not fallen. Plenty of time yet for a woman to grow tired of poverty and change her mind. He wheeled his horse without waiting for a reply, and his hired men followed, hooves throwing up clods of the half-frozen garden path on their way out. Luke stood watching them go, his heart still hammering with the particular fury of a man who has just been offered money for something that was never for sale, and found Yatul studying him with an expression he still could not quite read. "You did not need to defend me just then," she said. "I could have handled him alone." "I know that too," Luke said. "You could probably handle most of this valley alone with one hand before breakfast." "Doesn't mean I'm going to stand around with my hands in my pockets. While a man like that talks about you like you're a plot of land, he's trying to buy out from under someone." She was quiet for a moment, and then, unexpectedly, she reached out and set 2 fingers against his jaw, tilting his face up slightly, studying him the way she might study a blade she was deciding whether to trust. Her touch was warm, calloused, careful in a way that felt deliberate, and Luke's breath caught somewhere in his throat. "You are not what I expected, fiddler," she said quietly. "Is that good or bad?" "I have not decided," she said, but her thumb brushed once lightly, along the line of his cheekbone before she withdrew her hand, and the look she left him with was not the look of a woman who had not decided anything at all. The days shortened, the harvest came in heavy along the Ashwater's banks, and Weir's crossing settled, slowly and grudgingly, into something like tolerance if not welcome. Old Tobin the ferryman, a broad, weathered man who had run the crossing rope for 30 years and outlived 2 wives and most of his own teeth, took to Yatul with the easy directness of a man too old to bother with fear. "You've got a strong arm on you," he told her the first time she helped him haul a stuck cart off the ferry deck, hauling the whole loaded wagon single-handed while he barked instructions. "Wasted on that fiddler, if you don't mind me saying." Man couldn't lift a hay bale without complaining about his back for a week after. "I have noticed," Yatul said, entirely straight-faced, while Luke, standing nearby with the hay bale in question, made a wounded noise of protest. "I have a delicate constitution," Luke said. "It's part of the artistic temperament." "It is part of the lazy temperament," Yatul said, and Tobin laughed so hard he had to sit down on a mooring post, and Luke found himself grinning despite the insult, because the sound of her almost laughter had become, in these few short weeks, something he found himself arranging his whole day around chasing. It was Tobin, too, who first mentioned the outlaw. "Strange business up in the old watchtower ruins," he said one evening, over mugs of cider at the tavern while Luke tuned his fiddle for the night's crowd, and Yatul sat close beside him on the bench, closer than strictly necessary, her shoulder a warm, steady line against his. "Hunters coming down from the high pastures saying they've seen smoke where no smoke ought to be. Branded man, they say. Face marked for treachery, old style, the kind the clans used to burn into a man's cheek before they cast him out for good." Yatul went very still beside Luke, her cider forgotten halfway to her mouth. "A branded outlaw," she said carefully, "in the ruined watchtower above the north pasture." "That's the word going round," Tobin said, oblivious to the sudden tension in her shoulders. "Voss has already sent 2 of his men up to flush him out, wants him strung up for the crime of scaring his sheep off the high grass, I expect, more than any actual danger. Poor devil's probably just some starving wretch trying to keep out of the cold." "Do you know the man?" Luke asked quietly, watching her. Yatul set her mug down with careful precision, as though the table itself might shatter if she was not gentle with it. "I know of a man who wore that brand," she said, "many years ago. He was named traitor by my clan's council and cast out before I was old enough to understand what the word meant. I was told he was dead within a season of exile. No man survives the high wilds branded and alone for long. But you don't believe that, Luke said. It was not a question. I do not know what I believe, Yatul said, and there was something in her voice, not quite grief, not quite hope, something raw and old and carefully buried that made Luke reach under the table and take her hand without a word, and she let him, her fingers curling tight around his, and neither of them said anything more about it that night. Winter's approach announced itself in small, hard ways, frost thick on the cottage windows by mid-morning, the ash water running slower and colder, the mill wheel groaning with ice at its edges, geese cutting south in long, ragged lines overhead. And it was on one of those cold, bright mornings, while Luke split kindling in the yard and Yatul sharpened her long knife on the doorstep, that she said the words that had been sitting unspoken between them since the fair. I have been thinking of the season's end, she said, not looking up from the whetstone. The first snow cannot be far now. I have told my father I would decide by then. Luke set the axe down slowly. And what have you decided? I have not decided, she said, honest as always, but I do not think I will stay fitter. This has been a season of civility and even at moments of something warmer than that. But I did not choose this arrangement. I was wagered like a sack of grain at a fair table, and I have spent my whole life being told my worth by other people's mouths, my father's, my clan's, that toll lord's greedy stare. I think when the snow falls I will go home, back to my own people, my own choices. It is nothing against you, Luke Fletcher. You have been kinder to me than I expected any man in this valley to be. But kindness is not the same as belonging, and I do not belong here. Luke felt the words land like a fist to the ribs, but he kept his face steady, because he had learned enough of her by now to know that pleading would only make her retreat further into that proud, guarded stillness she wore like armor. All right, he said simply. Then I suppose we've got a season left to make the most of before you go. Something in her expression flickered surprise, maybe, that he hadn't argued, hadn't begged. You are not angry, she said. I'm plenty of things, Luke said. Angry isn't top of the list. Mostly I'm just sorry, if I'm honest, that I couldn't be more to you than a wager you got stuck with. But I'm not going to spend the days we've got left arguing you into staying somewhere you don't want to be. That's not the kind of man I want to be, and it's sure as anything not the kind of man worth staying for. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her gold eyes, and then she went back to sharpening her knife, and neither of them spoke of it again for several days, though the words sat between them like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples spreading slow and wide through everything that followed. The attack on the mill house came without warning 3 days later, in the gray hour just after dawn. Luke woke to the sound of Yatul already moving boots on, knife in hand, halfway to the door before his eyes had even properly opened, and the distant, unmistakable clang of the mill's warning bell carrying across the frosted fields. Raiders, Yatul said, already pulling her leather vambraces tight. At the mill. I can smell the smoke from here. They ran together through the frost-hardened fields, Luke's lungs burning long before Yatul's breath had even quickened, and came around the bend to find Hob Callan's mill wreathed in gray smoke, 3 horses tethered outside that did not belong to anyone in Weir's Crossing, and a knot of rough men in mismatched leather and stolen chainmail hauling sacks of grain toward a waiting cart. Ashfang Raiders, Yatul breathed, recognizing the crude wolf-fang brand burned into their leather straps. This far south. That should not be possible. One of the raiders spotted them and shouted a warning, and the whole scene erupted into motion, men scrambling for weapons. Hob Callan himself stumbling out of the mill's side door with blood on his temple, shouting something Luke couldn't make out over the roar of his own pulse in his ears. Yatul moved like something out of an old war song, closing the distance in a handful of strides, her knife flashing once, twice, disarming the nearest raider with brutal, economical efficiency before he'd even fully raised his blade. Luke, who owned no weapon more dangerous than a whittling knife and had no illusions about his usefulness in a proper fight, did the only thing he could think to do, grabbed a fallen raider's discarded torch and swung it wide, driving back a second man who'd been circling toward Yatul's unprotected side while she dealt with the first. "Behind you!" he shouted, and she spun, caught the motion, and put the second raider on the ground with a boot to the chest before the man had finished drawing his sword. It was over faster than Luke's racing heart could quite believe. The third raider fled on foot toward the tree line the moment he saw his companions down, abandoning the cart and half the stolen grain, and Yatul let him go rather than give chase, kneeling instead beside the miller, checking the cut on his head with brisk, practical care. "You're fortunate," she told Hob Callan, who was staring up at her with an expression caught somewhere between terror and gratitude. "Head wounds bleed like slaughtered pigs even when they are shallow. You will live, Miller." "Ashfang Raiders," Luke said, still breathing hard, looking at the crude wolf-fang brand on the fallen men's straps. "This deep into the valley. That's not a coincidence, is it? Tobin's tracks, the smoke up at the watchtower, something's shifting." "Something has been shifting for longer than we have noticed," Yatul said grimly, "and I think, Fiddler, we are about to find out how much longer we have before it breaks entirely open." Hob Callan would not meet either of their eyes as they helped him back into the mill, and Luke, turning the moment over later that night, could not shake the feeling that the miller's fear had tasted less like a man who had nearly died, and more like a man who had been caught doing something he should not have been doing. The suspicion did not fully take root until 4 days later when Luke found the letter. He had gone to the mill on an ordinary errand, a sack of flour Yatul had asked him to fetch for bread, since she had declared with characteristic bluntness that his baking was an insult to good grain, and found Hob Callan absent, the mill door unlatched, the grinding stones silent. He had gone looking for the miller in the small side room where the account ledgers were kept, meaning only to leave coin and a note, and had instead found a half-burned scrap of parchment fallen behind the account desk, missed by whoever had tried to destroy it in the cold hearth. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, but legible enough. Toll increased at North Gate as agreed. Grain count adjusted to hide the difference. Ashfang will find the mill undefended on the appointed night, as promised. Do not fail me again, or the arrangement ends and so does your usefulness. GV Luke stood in the cold little room with the scrap of parchment shaking slightly in his hand, and felt the whole shape of the valley's uneasy autumn rearrange itself around a single ugly truth. "Voss," he said aloud to no one, and then louder, angrier, "Voss." He did not wait to confront Hob Callan. He ran the whole way back to the cottage, lungs burning, and found Yatul in the yard stacking split wood with the easy, powerful economy of movement that still, weeks in, made something in his chest ache every time he watched her do ordinary things. "Hob Callan is Voss's man," Luke said, still gasping for breath, thrusting the scrap of burned parchment toward her. "He's been feeding the mill's defenses and grain count straight to the Ashfang Raiders on Voss's orders. The raid at the mill wasn't some wandering band that got lucky, Yatul. It was arranged. Voss is selling out the whole valley to raiders so he can, I don't know, seize control when the treaty falls apart, blame it on your clan, marry his way into more power once everyone's too frightened and broken to argue with him." Yatul read the scrap twice, her expression going hard and cold in a way Luke had not seen from her before, not even at the fair when Voss had tried to buy her outright. "This is not the act of a greedy toll lord," she said quietly. "This is the act of a man trying to start a war he believes he can profit from. If the Ashfang Raiders strike hard enough, blamed on my clan or not, my father will be forced to respond. The treaty breaks. The valley bleeds. And Voss stands in the wreckage holding whatever pieces he has arranged to keep for himself." Her gold eyes lifted to Luke's, sharp and furious. "We must tell my father, tonight if we can reach the war camp before dark. And the branded man at the watchtower," Luke said slowly, a new thought surfacing. "Tobin said Voss sent men to hunt him down almost the same week the raiders started showing up. What if he's not some starving wretch at all? What if he knows something Voss doesn't want known?" Yatul's hand tightened on the burned scrap of parchment until her knuckles went pale. "There is only one way to find out," she said. "We go to the watchtower first." Before Voss's men finish what they were sent to do, they climbed through failing afternoon light, following a game trail up through the north pasture and into the broken hill country where the old watchtower stood, a crumbling finger of gray stone left over from some war 2 generations dead, and found at its base the unmistakable signs of a struggle-trampled frost, a torn strip of cloak fabric caught on a bramble, boot prints that did not match anything a shepherd or a hunter would wear. They found Voss's 2 men first, unconscious and bound with strips of their own cloaks at the base of the tower stairs, disarmed with brutal efficiency, and standing over them, breathing hard, one hand pressed to a bleeding cut along his ribs, was a tall, gaunt orc in ragged furs with a crude, old brand burned into the green skin of his cheek. A jagged mark meant to mark a man forever as *Oathbreaker, cast out and unclean. He turned at the sound of their approach, and Yatul went utterly, completely still beside Luke, her breath catching audibly in her throat. "Grosk," she whispered. The branded man's gold eyes, the same pale gold as Yatul's, the same as Chief Rurgesh's, widened, and something in his gaunt, hollowed face cracked open with a grief so old and so deep that Luke felt it like a physical blow just to witness it. "Little sister," Grosk Frostwolf said, his voice rough with years of disuse, "I did not think to see your face again in this life." "They told me you were dead," Yatul said, her voice shaking now, all her careful stillness gone. "Cast out and dead within a season. That is what the council said. That is what I was raised believing." "I have been many things this last decade," Grosk said, "starving, hunted, and very nearly dead more times than I care to count among them, but not dead yet." His gaze flicked to Luke, wary, assessing, a warrior's habit that did not fully switch off even now. "Who is this human who walks with a Frostwolf woman through the high welds at dusk?" "Luke Fletcher," Yatul said. She hesitated, the word catching. "The man bound to me by this season's wager. He can be trusted, Grosk." "He is the reason I know to ask you what I am about to ask." She held up the burned scrap of parchment. "Tell me the truth of your exile. Tell me now, before Voss's other men find us here, because I think the same treachery that cast you out 10 years ago is the treachery threatening to burn this whole valley down tonight." Grosk stared at the parchment for a long moment, and then, slowly, painfully, sat down on the broken stone steps of the watchtower and began to speak. "I was warband scout to your father's council 10 winters past," he said. "I discovered a human toll lord's father, Garrick, Voss's own father, before him, bribing clan elders to falsify grain counts along the border, skimming coin from both sides of a fragile peace. I brought the proof to the council. I was called liar. The elder I accused was Voss's father's oldest friend, and he turned the council against me before I ever finished speaking, claimed I had forged the evidence to cover my own theft. I was branded Oathbreaker and cast into the wilds before the sun set on my accusation." His jaw tightened, the old grief and old fury still raw after 10 years. "I have spent a decade in exile for the crime of telling the truth too loudly to men who did not wish to hear it. And now, it seems, the son continues where the father began, and no one will listen to a branded outlaw's word against a toll lord's coin." "I will listen," Yatul said fiercely, kneeling beside him, gripping his forearm with both hands. "I will make our father listen, Grosk. I swear it on our mother's memory. You are no oathbreaker. You never were." "The council will not simply take a sister's word," Grosk said, though something in his ravaged face had begun, cautiously, to hope. "No," Luke said quietly, stepping forward, holding up the burned scrap of parchment. "But they might take Voss's own words in his own hand, alongside a decade-old truth finally proven right. Voss has arranged for the Ashfang raiders to strike this valley again, harder soon, and mean to let it be blamed on the Frostwolf clan so the treaty breaks and he profits from the wreckage. If we move fast enough and speak plainly enough, we can stop this before it costs any more lives than it already has." Grosk studied Luke for a long moment, something calculating and cautiously respectful moving behind his exhausted gold eyes. A human who stands unarmed between an orc woman and a warband's treachery, and speaks of stopping a war before it starts rather than profiting from it himself, he said slowly. You are an unusual choice of husband for a Frostwolf bride, storyteller. I've been told that a lot lately, Luke said. I'm starting to take it as a compliment. Grosk's mouth twitched, the ghost of something that might, in a kinder decade, have been a smile. Help me stand, he said. If there is a war camp to reach before dark and a treaty to save, then a branded outlaw and an exhausted fiddler had better start walking. They reached Chief Rurgesh's war camp in the last gray light of dusk. Hide tents stretched taut against the cold, cookfires already lit against the coming night, and the sight of Grosk Frostwolf walking into the firelight beside his sister sent a ripple of shocked silence through every warrior and elder gathered there, exactly as it had through the crowd at Weir's crossing fair weeks before, though for entirely different reasons. Chief Rurgesh rose from his place by the central fire slowly, his massive frame gone very still, his gold eyes fixed on the branded face of the son he had, 10 years ago, been forced by his own council to condemn. Grosk, he said, and the single word carried a decade of grief in it. Father, Grosk said, and there, in front of the whole assembled war camp, in front of elders who had voted to brand him and warriors who had grown up believing him a traitor's ghost, he told the whole truth again of Voss's father's old treachery, of the false accusation that had cast him out, of the decades spent surviving alone in the high wilds waiting for a chance to prove what no one had wanted to hear. Elder Asen, the same bent old man who had judged the trial at the fair, went pale and silent through the telling, and when Grosk finished, it was Asen who spoke first, his voice shaking. I sat on that council, he admitted, to the whole gathered camp. I voted to brand him on the word of an elder long since dead, an elder who was, I now remember with shame, always closer to Voss's family than his duty ever should have allowed. I have carried the doubt of that vote for 10 years and never had the courage to speak it aloud. I speak it now. I believe this man. I believe he was wronged. Chief Rurgesh's massive hands were trembling, not with weakness, Luke realized, but with a fury so old and so carefully banked it had turned to something almost like grief. And he crossed the distance to his son in 3 long strides and pulled him into an embrace that nearly lifted Grosk off his feet, both of them shaking, neither of them speaking, 10 years of exile and silence collapsing in a single fierce moment beside the war camp's central fire. It was Yatul who finally broke the silence, stepping forward with the burned scrap of parchment held out toward her father. There is no more time to grieve what was lost, she said, gently but firmly, the daughter and the warrior in her both speaking at once. Voss has arranged for the Ashfang raiders to strike again, and soon, meaning to blame our clan for whatever burns. We must move against him before he moves against the valley, or 10 years of my brother's suffering will have bought us nothing but a fresh war to replace the old one. Chief Rurgesh released his son, wiped roughly at his own eyes with the back of one massive hand, and turned to the parchment with the focus of a man returning to duty because duty, even now, could not wait for grief to finish its work. Then we move tonight, he said. Send word to every scout on the ridge line. If the Ashfang mean to strike Weir's crossing, they will come through the North Pass, the same pass my son was cast into 10 years ago to die. We will be waiting for them this time, and so, I think, will the truth. The storm broke 2 nights later in every sense of the word. Luke had spent the day helping Tobin move the ferry rope and dock supplies to higher, safer ground on the chief's advice, and had come home in the fading light to find Yatul standing in the cottage yard, staring up at the darkening sky where the first thick, heavy clouds of the season had begun rolling in from the northern peaks, the kind of clouds that meant snow, real snow, the first snow of winter finally, unmistakably arriving. She did not say anything as he came through the gate. She simply looked at the sky and then at him, and something in her expression was heavier than he had ever seen it. "It's coming tonight," she said quietly. "Maybe tomorrow morning at the latest. The season is ending, fiddler." Luke felt the words settle into his chest like cold water, but he kept his voice steady. "I know. Voss will move against the mill again before the snow closes the passes," Yatul said. "My father believes it. Grosk believes it. I believe it too. Whatever happens tonight or tomorrow, it will decide more than just Voss's treachery." She looked at him, gold eyes searching his face in the dimming light. "It may decide whether I have a home left to return to if I choose to go, or whether there is nothing left standing at all." Luke did not trust himself to answer that directly. Instead, without a word, he turned and went to the woodpile at the side of the cottage, and began carrying armload after armload of split logs in through the door, stacking them high against the wall by the hearth. Far more than the two of them would need for a single night, far more than a man preparing for one ordinary cold evening would ever bother to gather. He built the stack methodically, log by log, until it rose past his waist, a whole winter's worth of warmth laid in against a season he had been told, plainly and honestly, that she did not intend to see through to its end. Yatul stood in the doorway and watched him do it, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the failing light, and she did not say a single word the entire time, not when he grunted under the weight of the heaviest logs, not when he stacked the last of them and straightened, his palms scraped raw from bark and cold, not when he turned and found her still watching him with an expression that looked, for the first time since he had known her, almost fragile. "You are stacking wood for a winter I told you I do not intend to spend here," she said finally, very quietly. "I know that too," Luke said, brushing bark dust from his hands, refusing to make it into more than it was, though his heart was hammering. "Doesn't mean the fire shouldn't be warm while you're deciding. Whatever you decide, Yatul, I wasn't going to let you shiver through the choosing of it. That's not," he searched for the words, found them plain and unpolished, the only kind he had ever been able to offer her. "That's not what wanting someone looks like to me. Wanting someone doesn't mean making them stay. Sometimes it just means making sure they're warm, whichever way the wind blows." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, without a word, she crossed the yard, closed the distance between them, and kissed him, not tentative, not testing, but fierce and certain, her hands fisting in the front of his coat, her mouth warm against his in the cold evening air, and Luke's whole world narrowed down to the taste of her and the desperate, hungry press of her body against his. And for one long, suspended moment, the coming storm, the coming raid, the coming decision about winter and staying and leaving, all of it fell away, and there was only this, her hands, her mouth, the low sound she made against his lips that was somewhere between a growl and a sigh. When she finally pulled back, both of them breathing hard, her forehead resting against his, she did not say she had decided to stay. She did not say anything at all. But she did not let go of him either, her fingers still curled tight in the fabric of his coat, and Luke understood in that wordless, aching moment that whatever answer the season's end held, it was no longer as simple as the declaration she had made at the fair. They did not get the luxury of finishing the conversation. The warning bell at Weir's Crossing began ringing wild and frantic through the darkening evening, and both of them broke apart at the sound, already moving. The Ashfang raiders came down out of the North Pass in far greater numbers than any of them had feared, torches and crude iron blades catching the first fat flakes of falling snow. And Garrick Voss stood at the center of it all near the crossing dock, no longer bothering to hide behind pleasant smiles, directing the chaos with the cold efficiency of a man who had planned this night for months. "Burn the mill," he was shouting to a knot of raiders when Luke and Yatul arrived at the edge of the square, Grosk and a dozen Frostwolf warriors close behind them, "and leave the wolf-fang marks plain for everyone to see. Let the fools blame the clan for it, same as we planned. Voss." Luke's voice rang out across the chaos, and every head in the square turned, human and raider and orc alike, torchlight and falling snow swirling together in the cold dark. "It's over. We know about Hob Callan. We know about the grain counts, the letters, all of it. Your own father's treachery started this, and you've spent your whole life trying to finish it, and it ends tonight." Voss's face contorted with fury, all pretense finally stripped away. "You understand nothing, fiddler," he snarled. "This valley has bled under weak treaties and half measures for 2 generations. I mean to rule what's left of it once the fires die down, and there was never room in that plan for an orc bride's beggar husband to stand in my way." He drew his sword, and for one terrible, suspended heartbeat Luke thought this was how it ended. A toll lord's blade against an unarmed storyteller in a snow-swept square. But Yatul moved faster than thought, putting herself bodily between them, her own blade already drawn, meeting Voss's strike with a ringing clash of steel that echoed off the stone buildings around the square. "You will not touch him," she snarled, driving Voss back a full stride with the sheer force of the blow. "Not while I stand breathing, toll lord." The fight that followed was brutal and fast. Yatul's superior strength and years of clan training against Voss's desperate, cornered fury, and around them the wider battle raged, Grosk and the Frostwolf warriors driving into the Ashfang raiders' flank with the fierce, focused violence of men who had waited 10 years for a chance to prove their worth. Tobin the ferryman rallying a knot of weirs crossing men with pitchforks and old boar spears to defend the mill. Chief Rurgash himself arriving at the head of a second warband, just as the tide of the fight began, decisively, to turn. Luke, weaponless and desperate, saw Hob Callan the miller trying to slip away through the chaos toward the tree line, saw the man's guilty, terrified face in a stray flash of torchlight, and without thinking twice, tackled him bodily into the snow before he could vanish, pinning him there with more determination than skill, until 2 of Tobin's men arrived to bind his wrists. By the time Voss's blade finally clattered from his numbed fingers, disarmed by a final brutal strike from Yatul that put him flat on his back in the trampled, bloodied snow, the raid had already broken, the Ashfang raiders, seeing their patron beaten and their numbers thinning fast under the Frostwolf warband's counterattack, scattering back toward the North Pass in a ragged, panicked retreat. Yatul stood over Voss with her blade at his throat, breathing hard, snow settling in her dark hair, and for one long, terrible moment Luke thought she might end it there in the square. "Yatul," he said quietly, moving to her side despite the danger, his hand settling on her arm, not pulling her back, just present just there. "He's beaten. Let your father's justice finish this, not a blade in the snow." She held Voss's terrified gaze for one more long breath and then slowly lowered the blade. "You are fortunate," she told him, voice cold as the falling snow, "that the man beside me has more mercy in him than either of us deserves tonight." Chief Rurgash himself took custody of Voss and Hob Callan both, along with the burned parchment and the confession that spilled out of the terrified miller within the hour. And by the time the snow had thickened into a real, steady fall blanketing the square in white, the truth of the whole conspiracy, Voss's father's old bribery, Grosk's unjust exile, the arranged raid meant to break the treaty and profit from the wreckage, had been laid bare in front of every witness who mattered, human and orc alike. "The old treaty is renewed," Chief Rurgash announced to the battered, snow-dusted crowd gathered in the square, "not on the old uneasy terms, but on new ones, witnessed by both peoples tonight. My son Grosk Frostwolf is restored, his brand a mark of honor rather than shame from this day forward, for the truth he carried alone through 10 years of exile. And the toll lord Garrick Voss will answer for his father's crimes and his own before a council of both peoples, human and orc together, as this valley's law demands." The crowd's murmur, for the first time since Luke had known this village, held no fear in it at all, only something like relief, and something like wonder, at a night that had nearly broken them and had instead, against every expectation, forged something sturdier in the wreckage. Luke found Yatul standing a little apart from the crowd's noise, snow settling on her shoulders, her blade sheathed, her breathing finally slowing from the fight's fury into something calmer, and he crossed to her without a word, because there did not seem to be words large enough for what the night had held. "You stood between me and a blade tonight," he said finally. "You tackled an armed traitor into a snowbank with your bare hands," she said, "for a man who does not deserve your mercy any more than Voss did. We are perhaps an even match in foolish bravery, fiddler." "Maybe we are," Luke said, and found himself smiling despite the cold, despite the ache in every part of his body, despite everything. "Yatul, the first snow's falling. Right now. This is it, the season's end you gave yourself until." She looked up at the sky, at the thick white flakes drifting down over the torchlit square, over the battered mill, over the whole valley that had nearly burned tonight and had not, and then she looked back at him, and something in her gold eyes had settled into a certainty that had not been there before, not even in the fierce heat of their kiss in the cottage yard. "I told you at the fair," she said, "that I would give this season until the first snow and no more. That if I found nothing in you worth staying for, I would return to my people, treaty or no treaty." "I remember," Luke said, and made himself hold her gaze even though every part of him wanted to brace for the words that felt like they were coming. "I have found," Yatul said slowly, deliberately, "a man who threw a knife at a cheat's hand to defend a stranger's honor before he ever knew my name. A man who stood between a village's fear and a frightened child without flinching. A man who tackled an armed traitor barehanded into the snow, and who stacked a winter's worth of firewood against a hearth he believed I would abandon before I ever burned a single log of it." Her voice caught, just slightly, on the last of it, the fierce warrior's composure cracking to show something achingly tender underneath. "I have found, fiddler, that I do not wish to return to my father's war camp and my old certainties. I have found that the home worth staying for was never about stone walls or full granaries. It was you, all along, and I was too proud and too frightened of being wagered like a sack of grain to say so until the snow was already falling." Luke's throat had gone too tight to answer right away, so he did the only thing that felt honest enough. He closed the last distance between them and kissed her again, slower this time, no longer racing against a coming storm or a season's deadline, just steady and certain, and full of everything he had not let himself say plainly until now. "I love you," he said, when he finally drew back far enough to speak. "I should have said it before tonight. I love you, Yatul Frostwolf, wager or no wager, treaty or no treaty. I'd have stacked that firewood for you if you'd told me plain to my face you were leaving come morning. I'd have wanted you warm regardless." "I know," she said, and her voice was rough with something that might, in a fiercer warrior, have been tears. "That is precisely why I am staying, Luke Fletcher, because you never once asked me to." Chief Rurgesh sealed the new treaty 3 days later, once the worst of the storm had passed, and the roads were clear enough for the whole valley to gather at Weir's Crossing Square, the same square where the old wager had been won and lost, and in the end, transformed into something neither Luke nor Yatul could have imagined that cold autumn afternoon. Garrick Voss was led away in chains toward the border keep to stand before the joint council his own treachery had demanded be formed. Hob Callan, in exchange for his full confession, was spared the noose but stripped of the mill and sent to labor out his debt on the chief's own lands. Grosk Frostwolf stood at his father's right hand throughout the ceremony, the old brand on his cheek no longer hidden, worn now the way Yatul had once described, not as shame, but as a mark of honor for a truth carried too long alone. And when the formal treaty words had been spoken and the ashwood token, the same one carved with a running wolf and a flame that had started the whole strange, wagered season, was passed once more from Elder Ossen's hands into Luke's. This time it was not to seal a bargain neither party had chosen, but to mark, before the whole gathered valley, the binding both of them had chosen freely at last. "By clan custom and by the new treaty both," Chief Rurgesh declared, his voice carrying easily across the crowded square, "let it be witnessed that Yatul Frostwolf, daughter of my blood, has chosen the man beside her of her own free will, past any wager's terms, past any season's deadline. Let no man or woman, human or orc, ever call this bond less than what it plainly is. The crowd's response was not the fearful muttering of that first market day, nor the wary tolerance of the weeks between. It was something warmer, something Luke had not dared hope to hear directed at either of them. A cheer, ragged and genuine, rising up from villagers and clan warriors both, from Tobin waving his hat over his head, from the miller's boy who had once thrown a clod of dirt now grinning wide-eyed at the front of the crowd, from Grosk clasping Luke's forearm in the rough, warm grip of a brother rather than a stranger. They walked home together that evening as the light faded gold and gray over the Ashwater's frozen edges, past the mill wheel now still and frost-rimed for the season, past the ferry dock where Tobin was already telling anyone who'd listen a wildly exaggerated version of the raid's final battle, and came at last to the small stone cottage with its crooked chimney and its overgrown garden buried now under a soft white blanket of new snow. Inside, the fire Luke had built weeks before still burned steady and warm against the cold, fed from the tall stack of split wood he had gathered on an evening when he had believed, with his whole aching heart, that he might be building it for a woman who would never spend a single night beside its light. Yatul stood in the doorway a moment, the way she had that very first evening, studying the small, humble shape of the home she had once expected to hold nothing worth staying for. And then she crossed the threshold, shrugged off her heavy travel cloak, and settled onto the bench beside the hearth with the easy, unhurried comfort of a woman who had finally, fully, chosen where she belonged. "You built this stack too high for one man's winter," she said, watching the firelight dance over the neat rows of split logs. "You will have wood left over come spring, fiddler, at this rate." "I had a feeling," Luke said, settling beside her, close enough that her warmth pressed against his side, "that I might need it for more than one winter if I was patient enough and lucky enough, and didn't do anything too foolish to ruin my chances." "You tackled an armed traitor bare-handed into a snowbank 3 days ago," Yatul pointed out, tipping her head against his shoulder, her voice warm with something that was, unmistakably now, love. "I would not call that the behavior of a cautious man." "No," Luke agreed, wrapping his arm around her, feeling the whole exhausted, aching, impossibly grateful weight of the last season finally settle into something like peace. "But it worked out, didn't it?" Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady over the sleeping valley, over the mill and the ferry crossing and the war camp beyond the ridge, over a treaty finally sealed in truth rather than treachery, over a branded man's name finally cleared, over a season's wager transformed, against every hard old prejudice on both sides of the river, into something neither of them would ever again have to fight to keep. Inside, the fire burned on, fed by wood gathered in silent, stubborn hope, warming two people who had started as strangers bound by an unwanted bargain and ended, when the storm had finally passed, and the dawn came up quiet and gold over the snow-covered valley, as the only thing either of them needed left standing at all. Yatul Frostwolf did not leave before winter. She stayed through that winter, and the spring that followed it, and every season after, and when Luke Fletcher told stories in the tavern by the crossing in the years to come, the tale he told oftenest, the one the whole valley eventually learned by heart, was the one about a proud orc bride who said she meant to leave before the snow, and a foolish, ordinary man who answered her only with a full woodpile and a fire that never once, in all the winters that followed, went cold.